welcome to my channel. My name is Vips, and in this video I'm going to take you along in the making of some silky shirts. Sorry about the framing of a lot of the shots, by the way. I actually shot this footage as some of the very first clips when I had just gotten this camera. I was way too shy to talk to the camera much, and I didn't really know where this video was headed, so here I am many months later trying to piece together the footage that I did get into something coherent for you to watch. I had gotten a basic shirt pattern from my grandmother's litter load kit, which I'm now transferring to a new sheet of paper to make alterations to fit my vision for these shirts. I wanted something like this, drapey, silky. Of course, I had been on Pinterest. Pinterest is a dangerous place to be. One initial change I'm making to the shirt pattern is the length of the shirt. It seemed to be very long, though I will admit the first version I made ended up a bit short, so perhaps I should have been a bit less ruthless here. Oh well. Part of the inspiration for this project was the fabric itself. I had found this dead stock fabric on an online Danish fabric store and wanted to try it out. This was actually created in the midst of me sewing my wedding dress, and I was worried about being cold. You know, it was a sleeveless design, we were having the party in February. So I had kind of envisioned a shirt with big sleeves that I could potentially wear underneath the dress. I bought 3 shades of the fabric, a slippery, silky viscose. It is beautiful and absolutely a pain to work with. I had bought blue, ivory, and a caramel color. And the caramel color was actually a really close match to the golden brown of my wedding dress. See the links in the description for the making of that huge project. But they only had a small amount of that color, not quite enough to make an actual shirt. I still have it actually, and I have no clue what to make with it. But I ended up making a blue shirt first, and then altering the design and making an ivory one as well. And these two are what you'll see me making in this video. Here I am, drawing in the dart legs on the pattern. An alteration I attempted was closing the dart to add more width to the shoulders to mimic a cowl neck design. At least I think that was my intention. So I marked a line to the center of the current shoulder and hinged the whole piece down, closing the dart and essentially opening a new dart in the shoulder, which I instead filled in and left open. I haven't really done any pattern manipulation like this before or since, but I've watched the Dress Historian here on YouTube and have a rough idea of how flat patterns work. I will say that things did not go according to plan. But I did like playing around with the pattern in this way, and I'll probably do experiments in the future as well. I also traced out my back bodice pattern. I altered the back bodice pattern to have the same width as the new front bodice pattern, slashing and spreading to match at the shoulder. I think for the sleeve I pretty much kept the pattern as it was, since it already had a slight bishop sleeve, and then I just exaggerated it slightly when I cut out my pieces. Oh, the trivialities of sewing. I usually sew my fabric together into a tube with a zigzag stitch before washing it to prevent fraying, and to only have to do 1 seam instead of 2, but that does mean unpicking that stitch again when I'm ready to work with the fabric. Enjoy a sample of the 6.7 minutes I spent doing this. Here the fabric is laid out nicely on the kitchen floor, and I'm ready to crawl around cutting it out. The lighting is really dark here since this was filmed on a gloomy December day, hence the fuzzy slippers. I will say, sitting now and editing this in the beginning of summer is quite a different experience. The smallish rectangle piece is the cuff for the sleeves. I was pondering the best layout, but realized I could fit all my pieces if I folded the fabric in half lengthwise. Cuffs, I cut them in half, adding an additional seam, but I eliminated this in the ivory top, just keeping the top edge folded over instead. front bodice, I cut the fabric on the fold. And now for an admittance. That is all the footage I have for the blue shirt. For some reason, I decided to film none of the construction or the troubleshooting I did. Oops. I mean, I did say I had no real plan for this video when I started. So, let's cut to some much later film footage talking you through what happened after. Hi there, Vips from the future with a much needed update on the blue shirt situation. I had played around with altering the neckline to potentially mimic more of like a cowl neck design, but the alteration I did didn't end up in anything that really looked like the way I had thought it would, and also for some reason it was like there wasn't enough fabric up in the shoulders. To fix that, I ended up opening up the shoulder seam and then adding in this additional square of fabric or rectangle of fabric, which I then added an elastic to in the middle to kind of ruche it up. I do think that that detail actually looks pretty neat and looks cute. I just wish I had been able to incorporate it without having to add the extra bit of fabric, because now I have 2 additional seams that I don't love, but it works. As you can see, I also ended up creating a matching skirt to go with the blue top. So when you wear them together, it sort of looks like a dress, which I really like, and luckily it still fits at this moment in time. I've worn them together a couple of times for Christmas, but I didn't get any pictures, unfortunately, so you just have to believe me that it looked good then as well. So another major issue I ended up having with this blue shirt was the length of the shirt. It ended up way too short. I mean, now that I have to wear the skirt so high up over the bump, it's not an issue, but when the skirt sits at my waist or when I just wear the blouse with anything else, it's very visible that I should have lengthened it a bit more. I cut it way too short. And we've got a dog in the background. I'm gonna close the door. So that more or less brings us to version 2, which is hanging here behind me, the ivory one. And the one thing I definitely knew I wanted was to keep the length too short. I also ignored the changes I'd done to the shoulders for this pattern. Instead, I cut my pieces with a very generous seam allowance in the front, and then I created a yoke in the back. So I could add a pleat to the middle. I think this added some, it made it very comfortable to wear. It gave it more mobility. And then for the front, I just kind of pinned it together on my body where it looked like it looked nice. I also created this small band collar, which wasn't quite what I was imagining, but it worked out, and it definitely created a different shirt from the one I'm wearing. I think I've managed to explain everything I did more or less between filming, so you should be all caught up and ready to see me finish off the shirt. Good morning. I hope you'd like to join me for some quiet morning sewing. I'm gonna get started. Having constructed the alternate version of the shirt in the ivory fabric, it was time to work on finishing the cuffs, turning under the slit and stitching that in place with small back stitches, and hand stitching the lining layer down to the seam allowance, enclosing all the raw seams. I think it looks pretty good. It's really hard fabric to work with, but because it's so shimmery and moves and shifts, it also hides a lot of mistakes. So hard and easy, I guess. This is the front. I was working on it last night and I got a drop of blood right here in the middle center front. So luckily it looks like some cold water rinsed it out just fine. I haven't been able to decide with myself whether or not this is, let's call it a prototype more than a mock-up, or if it's going to be a real finished garment. I mean, I want to be able to wear it as is, but I've been working on it piecemeal and I've definitely been skipping steps. The ironing board has not been out once. So hopefully the end result is going to be good. I mean, it's going to be good enough, definitely, especially if I do decide that it's just a prototype and not the final garment, but undecided as yet. Pins don't want to stay in the fabric. I've been double weaving them whenever I only have 2 layers of fabric to pin together because it's so slippery. I find myself always thinking I can get one more stitch and then waiting too long to tie off. So these are the buttons I'm going to use. I'm going to use these 2 up in the neck area to close it off, and then the other 4 are for the cuffs. I'm just stash busting at the moment, so I think I'm going to do 2 and 2, even though they don't, I mean, then the 2 sides will match. I didn't have enough similar. I think in the end this is one of these details where no one but myself is really gonna notice, so it'll be fine. Also, I'm just eyeballing it. So this is where I've determined that the buttonholes are going to be placed, and I made sure that they were mirrored on both sides. I'm sure there's a correct way to button up cuffs on a woman's shirt, but I haven't figured it out yet, and you know what? It works. Here we go, 2 buttonholes. I've just whip stitched around the edges. It's not the neatest. I read a blog post somewhere about doing nice buttonholes, and apparently historically they used to whip stitch first and then they do a buttonhole stitch on top. But I mean, I didn't check the sources on or anything, but they did say that the whip stitches were enough to just keep it open, and based on the eyelets I did for the wedding dress back with lacing holes, which I also just whip stitched, it seems to be holding up fine. So I guess this is I'm still not sure if this is the finished garment or a prototype approach. We're just gonna go with this. Just roughly marking where the button should go. I seem to have a lot of leeway with this pattern. Just nice. Probably should have marked it off, but the fabric is so slippery also that I found that my markings just weren't that effective. Probably also I'm not used to working with something this slippery. It's definitely been a challenge. I'm actually really glad I ended up choosing the poly satin for my wedding dress. It was a lot more forgiving to work with. Also, if I had to unpick seams, I just iron it and then the seams would disappear. You couldn't see that I'd already been over it once. Whereas I unpicked a seam here, and yeah, that's gonna be visible, but it's all part of the learning process. All right, close it up. Yeah, looks pretty good to me. Right, now for the other one. And I know my machine can do buttonholes, but for some reason that really intimidates me. I have done it before, but sometimes I like the precision that hand sewing allows, and I also it seems more forgiving sometimes. I can do smaller, minute adjustments that the machine just doesn't give you. I still want to add a tack to the inside right here because it kind of wants to pop open a little too much, but oh, the sleeves are so swooshy. And the fabric, even though it's a pain in the ass to work with, it feels so good to wear. And I just love the way it shimmers and it's so pretty. Thank you so much for following along on this admittedly very disjointed video. I hope you liked the flashback to the early days of filming. I will admit I enjoyed looking back at the footage. I certainly found it entertaining to start editing this almost a full year after I actually made these projects. I ended up not making more of these, even though when I was working on the ivory one I wasn't quite sure. But maybe I'll return to something like this in the future. I hope you're excited for future projects. See you next time. Hi.